Let's talk about the future. A lot of folks seem to think that capitalism is best wherever you... Okay, I'm not gonna wear these the whole time. Let's talk about the future. A lot of folks seem to think that capitalism is the best we're ever gonna do. Now, I don't blame people for thinking this. Most of us are exposed to so much pro-capitalist propaganda from the moment we're born that we can't imagine any other way of life. Now, I certainly myself fell into this category for most of my life. I mean, hell, I was a capitalist myself until I was almost 30 years old, and I certainly thought that capitalism was the only way forward. But check this out. An American company called Software recently launched Sobot, a machine that can replace 17 factory workers in the manufacture of garments. This is a huge deal because garment manufacturing is one of the last traditional manufacturing jobs that still requires a large number of workers. Until now. As factories drastically reduce their labor requirements, self-driving cars eliminate the most common job in the United States, artificial intelligence continues to automate white-collar jobs, we just run out of work. What are we going to do? Capitalism doesn't have any answers for this question because capitalism as a system needs workers to be working. Under capitalism, you can't survive without money, and you don't get money without a job. Incidentally, capitalist businesses also need money to keep producing stuff, and if nobody has any jobs, and therefore no money, well, we can't buy stuff. So as it turns out, capitalism is inherently unstable and built on a whole mess of contradictions. Karl Marx described capitalism as the moving contradiction, since free market forces press labor time to a minimum through downsizing and automation, while at the same time upholding the idea that labor time is the sole measure and source of worth. In other words, we're supposed to work all the time, but capitalists want to make us work less so they can pay us less and make more money. Look at it this way, capitalist businesses are always going to try to maximize profits. That's why they exist. And there are only two ways to increase profits, by raising prices or cutting costs. And what's the biggest expense for most businesses? Labor. This means that according to the logic of capitalism, the rational choice for a capitalist is to reduce labor costs, since the biggest cost for most companies is labor. So capitalists will always try to pay people less and cut employees as much as possible to make more profits. And at the same time, each individual capitalist is hoping that all the other capitalists out there are going to pay their workers more so that those workers can afford to buy their products. So the choice that is extremely rational for an individual capitalist is extremely irrational for capitalism as a whole, because when wages are cut and unemployment rises, people stop buying stuff. Capitalists are biting the hands that feed them, and that's a feature, not a bug. Karl Marx actually predicted all of this long before the first industrial robot was ever created. In Capital, Marx wrote that capitalism constantly threatens to take away a worker's livelihood. As technology advances, workers are constantly in danger of losing our jobs. This is such an incredible failing of capitalism that I can't believe more people aren't talking about it, especially these days. We are barreling towards a future where the vast majority of jobs are going to disappear, and there is no workable solution to this problem within the framework of capitalism. A Russian scientist named Pyotr Kropotkin predicted all of this over a century ago and outlined very specifically what automation would mean for the working class and what we should do about it in his seminal work, The Conquest of Bread. I've talked about this a lot on my channel. You should check it out if you haven't already. What Kropotkin realized and what we as a species need to finally come to grips with is that automation and the increased productivity it leads to is not a problem at all. It's just the framework of capitalism that warps and twists scientific progress into a threat to the working class. Kropotkin put it this way: the evil of the present system is not that the surplus value of production goes to the capitalist, the evil lies in the possibility of a surplus value existing. In other words, we shouldn't be upset that capitalists are getting extremely wealthy from our excess labor. I don't really care if somebody's making more money than me, I really don't. We should be angry because we're doing excess labor to begin with. As I discussed in my video on the 8-hour workday, link in the description, capitalism has fooled us all into believing that we have to spend most of our waking hours working for wages, when in reality technology should be freeing us from all of this excess labor. For over 40 years, worker salaries have stagnated while our productivity has increased. In other words, we are making more money for our employers, but we're not making any more money for ourselves, and we're spending the same amount of time, if not more, at the job. As technology advances, every hour we spend is more productive, but the only people benefiting from this increased productivity are the capitalists who own the companies we work for. And again, the really sad thing about this isn't that we're not making more money, it's that technological progress and scientific advances are hurting poor people when it should be liberating them. Sewing in a factory is dirty, dangerous work. Sweatshop tailors work long, grueling hours and suffer terrible injuries while operating sewing machinery, so the Sobot should be seen by these workers as a miracle invention that will liberate them from a really terrible job. Instead, because of the way capitalism functions, these workers are going to suffer even more because when they lose their jobs, they'll be completely screwed. They're losing their livelihoods. They won't be able to earn money. Many of them will become homeless and go hungry. That's messed up. We should be in a position where we can cheer at the liberation of workers from dangerous, stressful jobs like driving and sewing in factories, but instead we're terrified of the future that automation will deliver upon us, all because we allow a small number of capitalists to own the factories and the land that produce the food and the clothing and all the other things that we need to survive. Under capitalism, the mighty and formidable strength of all our human industry is hyper-focused on one very specific target: profit for capitalists. And this profit motive leads to nothing more than waste. If we think of a dollar as a unit of productivity, then every dollar that is channeled into the pocket of a capitalist in the form of profit is waste and nothing more. It's not just a waste of money, it's a waste of time. Your time spent at the job when you could be spending it doing something far more productive and more enriching for your life. Capitalists are steering the ship of industry into some very strange and sad directions. We have enough surplus in the capitalist wonderland of the United States of America to house every homeless American, feed every hungry American, and clothe every American in rags, but all this stuff is trapped. Capitalists use empty condos and houses as investments. Warm clothes are warehoused in department stores and destroyed if they don't sell fast enough while people go cold. Farmers are paid by the government to destroy crops or to not grow crops to begin with, all in order to drive up prices and yield better profits for the agricultural corporations out there like Monsanto. Machines are not the enemy of the working class. We as a species should be striving for more productivity, more automation. We should be embracing automation as a gift to humanity. After all, the job of a machine is to do dirty, difficult work so that we humans don't have to. Machinery and technological progress can and should be liberating workers and giving us better, more comfortable lives, not driving workers all over the world ever deeper into poverty and hopelessness. But because of capitalism, we find ourselves in this hellish situation where we're making our capitalist bosses more and more profit every hour we work, our wages are stagnant, and despite of all of these incredible advances we're making in productivity, 8 out of every 10 Americans suffer from workplace stress. I know I do. But it's not surprising at all that this is how things are developing when you realize that our entire society is built upon the idea that every human endeavor should be undertaken with the sole goal of producing profits for capitalists. All of this is not even mentioning the way we export the worst of our capitalistic oppression to developing nations, where poor laborers work long hours for starvation wages to manufacture our goods. And even those jobs are getting fewer and farther between as technology advances. So what solutions can capitalism provide to these kinds of problems? Well, capitalists will tell you that the solution is more capitalism. Open more markets, remove more regulations, give more power and control to capitalist institutions. But how does that make any sense when these problems we're talking about are endemic to capitalism itself? Strengthening capitalism in this situation is like throwing gasoline on a house fire. Now, there are many liberals who believe that a universal basic income would be the solution. Under a UBI scheme, every citizen would receive a salary from the government to cover basic expenses, basically free money from the government. Now, on the surface, a universal basic income looks a lot like communism. It is a system where the rich are being taxed and those taxes are then being distributed to the poor. Now, never mind the fact that all of that wealth was generated through the excess labor of poor people to begin with, but put that aside for now. It's essentially a strategy for preserving the structure of capitalism in a highly automated world. It's merely a mechanism to keep the super wealthy in luxury, preserve power for those who already have it, and keep the rest of us relegated to the lower ranks of society. Now, don't get me wrong, if universal basic income gets floated around in the mainstream in the United States of America, I'm not going to fight it tooth and nail. There will definitely be alleviative and palliative effects for the people in our society who are the most desperate. But in the long run, it is simply a strategy to prevent real, meaningful improvement in the situation of humanity as a whole. Now, mark my words, capitalists are going to start pitching UBI more and more as the inevitability of a jobless future becomes increasingly apparent. It's already starting to happen. It's going to happen more and more. You might even see people talking about it in the next election because UBI is going to secure their position at the top, and it's going to keep the vast majority of the rest of us at the bottom. Now, did capitalists give us all this technological progress in industry? I would argue that they did not. I would argue that the workers are the ones who contributed the vast majority of this technological progress to humanity. But it doesn't really matter who, quote unquote, gave it to us. What matters is we are in this situation now. We are facing this future now. What are we going to do? The UBI will cement capitalist power structures into place and strip away any semblance of social mobility that are left. The capitalists will own the robots, they will own the land that the robots sit on, they're gonna own our homes, everything. They're gonna own it all, and we will have lost the one source of power that we have left today, our labor. In a post-automation world, workers won't be able to strike to resist capitalism. Unions will be meaningless since we won't have jobs to unionize around. We won't be employed by capitalists anymore. We won't have any bargaining chips left on the table as a working class. We will be at the mercy of capitalists, and we'll have to settle with living on whatever scraps they decide to throw down to us. And if we keep letting them have what they want for very much longer, they're going to want to own us, not just our labor. Most capitalists who have given this any thought know this already, and a few have even spoken up about it. Sean Parker, ex-president of Facebook, had this to say on the subject. I can't find the video clip, which is kind of weird, but it's been documented a lot. He said this: because I'm a billionaire, I'm going to have access to better healthcare. So I'm going to be like 160 and I'm going to be part of this like class of immortal overlords. Because, you know, the Warren Buffett expression about compound interest, give us billionaires an extra 100 years and you'll know what wealth disparity looks like. This is the end game for capitalism. What else could it be? How else could it end? If you think carefully and honestly about how the future is going to unfold under a system like capitalism, where else can it lead except down this dark road of domination and oppression in a jobless future? Those of us on the left see a very different path to a very different future. If we dismantle capitalism right now and replace it with a system that is more egalitarian and that distributes wealth more evenly to the people who are actually doing the labor, then every human being can enjoy the fruits of this technological progress which have been developed through centuries of worker exploitation. Every generation of workers has sacrificed blood for this technological progress that we're seeing today. Blood and also time. Time that could have been spent with our families, time that could have been spent developing artistic and scientific interests, time that was rightfully ours but ripped away from us for the benefit of the capitalist class. So I'm begging you, please give this some thought. Don't buy into the idea of universal basic income just because it looks good on the wrapper. Don't allow the workers of the world to be transformed into the non-working recipients of unnecessary charity, forced into a situation where we must suffer the indignity of relying on the leftovers and the castaways of the capitalists. Every time a dirty, stressful, dangerous job becomes obsolete, we as workers should be filled with joy, not worry. The only solution to a jobless future is the dismantling of capitalism now and the cessation of capitalist waste and theft. The fruits of technological progress belong to all of humanity, not just one small class. Now, a lot of capitalist sympathizers say that communism has never worked and could never work. They look at the past failures and mistakes of communist societies and they want us to believe that there's this binary that exists where we only have 20th century Soviet-style communism and capitalism to choose from. But that's just not the case. I personally am an anarchist. I believe that we can do away with the state, we can do away with capitalism, and we can govern ourselves. And if you want to know about these ideas, you want to know more about anarchism, what I think might be a good system to replace capitalism, you can check out my video series on how anarchism works. There's a link in the description. But even if you don't buy into the ideas of anarchism, there are a number of other leftist ideologies out there that you can discover and explore. And believe me, we leftists do not always agree about the best ways that we should reshape society in a post-capitalist world. In fact, we're pretty famous for not getting along with each other. But we do agree on at least one thing, and that's that capitalism is an unstable, oppressive system with no workable solutions for the virtually jobless future that's headed our way. One way or another, the end of capitalism as we know it is just on the horizon. And I just hope that we can find a better solution, whatever it might be, before the clock runs out. I'm American Johnson. This is Non-Compete. Thanks for watching. Now I wish that I did wear these the whole time.
It must be the American way of doing things that makes you the luckiest guy in the world.
I don't think I'm so lucky.
You don't? Well, let me show you.
Hey, what's that gadget? Television?
No, it's a time machine. Just pull that lever. You'll see how people worked 100 years ago.
Hey, this I like.
Oh, that's too far back. Try again. We want to stop at 1850.
Who's the character?
That's your grandfather, Joe.
Oh.
He had to work 69 hours a week.